Well, welcome everybody, and it's an interesting room that they have us in here. So I apologize that, well, this is what we have, and so I'm hoping that you'll be able to see this. Unfortunately, we've got the lights off, and this is about as clear as we can get it in light of the light all around us because of the beautiful windows, so that's a nice thing. So welcome. As was mentioned, I work with Catholic Relief Services, and many folks know about the work that we do overseas. We work in about 100 different countries. We're the Bishop's Official Relief and Development Agency, but not many know about the work that we try to do in engaging U.S. Catholics. And our goal is to really help U.S. Catholics live their faith in solidarity with the people that we serve around the world. And in my mind, as I've worked with young people over the years, this idea of solidarity is something that captures their hearts, and I think in a way has the power to be transformative. So that's a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today, and how solidarity, accompaniment, and kinship can inspire, ignite this sense of mission in young people. But to begin with, solidarity hits very close to home for me. You can see it. This is my niece and nephew who were adopted from Ethiopia. Lapa, my niece, and Kabeta, my nephew. And I want to begin by just sharing a little story because I think it sets a little bit of the tone for the day. This was a few years back when my brother and I were going to take Lapa and Kabeta to the zoo. Now, before I continue, they call my brother Ababa, which is the Amharic word for daddy. So as we were getting ready to go, this was one of these days where Steve and I had this great day planned. We were so excited. We'd been preparing it for a couple of weeks. And as we were getting ready, you could tell that Kabeta, who loved the zoo, all of a sudden as a 3-year-old decided, I no longer like the zoo and I want nothing to do with the zoo. And it was just one of these moments where the day was going to be crashing apart as Kabeta was whiny, crying, wanted nothing to do with anything of the day. And you could see my brother's boiling point beginning to rise. And as he's about to explode, had had enough with his son, Lapo jumps in between them, reaches over to Kabeta, throws him down to the toys and says, Kabeta, play, turns around to my brother and says, Ababa, breathe. And I just, as the uncle, stood back and watched and thought, how is he going to respond to this? Well, and indeed, he stepped back, he took a breath. I went and played with Kabeta while Lapo and Steve got the rest of the day together. But I share that story because I think opportunities like today allow us to do just that. Step back and breathe a little bit. To take stock of our ministry. To take stock of what we want to be about and who we are about, and what we want our ministries to help other people to discover in their own lives. That sometimes when we're ministering, we're helping others to breathe as they take stock and understand how God is calling us all into this great work of mission. So we're going to do some dialogue throughout the day. So to continue, I'd like you to pair up or maybe move into triads. Just group up with somebody. Introduce yourself, where you're from, what is your ministry, and then perhaps what interested you about this topic, particularly for young people and accompaniment. All right? So take about 3 minutes. A lot of chance to continue the conversations as we go through. One of the things that I get to do with Catholic Relief Services, I'm actually from Baltimore. I'm not from the Atlanta area. But however, my job takes me around the country, and I also get a chance to work with a lot of young people, particularly on youth conventions or whatnot. And I'll often ask them, about their idea of service and mission and so forth. And more often than not, the first answer I would get, projects, hours, and I gotta do this for confirmation, I gotta do this for graduation. In other words, it's something that becomes much more of a requirement as opposed to a call. And I'm not going to say that even as a teacher, I didn't require hours, service hours, and so forth. I did that same thing, but over time I began to learn that it didn't seem to have the effect that I really wanted with young people. In fact, it became more mature, and especially filling out all the paperwork. And so when I was teaching high school and in charge of the service learning program, I had to start rethinking all this because I could see it was having the opposite effect. And in part, what I did not want was this. I survived Catholic school, and instead, what I would really like for the young people that I was ministering with is I wanted them to be inspired to mission to the world because that's what paved my own life. It was my parents, really, who never required service hours, but certainly found ways to push me into it. And the more they did, the more I felt this just ongoing call, which eventually led to the Jesuit volunteers. And if anybody has volunteered with any group, you eventually find that you're ruined for life. I don't know if the Jesuits coined that term, but it's something that we use. However, I think all service has the potential to ruin us for life. In other words, we can't go back to not knowing. And once we begin to see the world in a different way, we become inspired. Earlier this year, Pope Francis presented a very interesting quote in his message on the World Day of Mission. And that was, "Young people are the hope of mission." Now, I have a brother who is also a high school teacher, and I have two brothers, one who is a college professor and the other who works for the government. And my brother, who is the teacher, and I truly believe this. My other two brothers would say this. They don't understand young people, don't understand why we work with them, and do not see any value in terms of what they contribute to the world. And yet, our Holy Father says they're the hope of mission. So, second conversation. How do you see young people as the hope of mission? I'll continue that quote. But how is it that you see young people as the hope of mission? I'll invite you into that conversation for a moment. In the face of danger, to go into this program, learn work skills so that they could enter into a job force in the job market and ultimately support their families. It was an extraordinary act of resilience and courage and hope. Young people are the hope of mission. How so? What are some of the highlights you talked about? I heard Eucharist gathering of 3,000 young people.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? How are they the hope of mission?
What Catholic work camps, they go to?
The commitment to the work camps, short-term service?
They get outside of their own little bubble. They see the world and they get joy that way.
Right, exactly. They want to get engaged into the world. They want to get involved into the world. They do want to step out.
They have more platforms as far as technology goes.
Absolutely, and they're not afraid to use that as a way of learning. Other thoughts?
They're involved in school, and they are looking for ways to bring the heart and soul into a project in the community. Like bring church out into the community, in the streets, and the neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
I think because they're so good with the computers and with the online and all that, they have the answer because they can communicate with anybody in the world, which never did.
Absolutely.
We have to lead it.
Right. Young people are the hope. But let's also keep it real. For every story we just named here, I could have made a story of a student that would sit there and just say, yeah, go ahead, entertain me, convince me. And so I know that there's another reality too, that sometimes young people can appear apathetic. Some young people are very unmotivated. Some young people are very marginalized and thus are not involved in that and don't fully understand it. It may not have even been exposed to something inspirational. And I think thus, that's for us. That's our responsibility. We have inspiration. We have a mission unlike any others. We believe in this Trinitarian God, this God whose very nature is relationship, and who calls us into relationship, and calls us out of our comfort zones, out of our boundaries, and across boundaries so that we become people of love. There's nothing more inspirational in all of the world. And yet, young people don't fully understand that about God. And that mission extends to us, to go into the world. It is not just God who brings the love, but God works through each of us. We're that vehicle. That's the incarnation. God comes to each of us through each of us. God's mission, which was there all along, has a church. We often say the church has a mission, but in reality, there's some truth to that, but in reality, it's God's mission has a church. God's mission has us. And I think if young people really knew that and understood that, we'd see a lot more involvement in this sense of service, this sense of engagement in the world, this sense of really wanting to be who we are. Many young people that I see sitting back entertain me or something somewhat apathetic or somewhat disengaged, I just don't think they understand the love that is deep within them. And yet when they begin to get a glimpse of that, what I have seen come from young people is something extraordinary. Service that inspires me, that challenges me, that pulls me even out of myself. It's in a way we could help each young person see that they are a mission to this earth. As Pope Francis even defined it for himself in his apostolic letter, imagine that inspiration. I think it's that very same understanding of oneself that comes from Pope Francis's understanding of God, his own relationship with God. God calls me to be that love in the world. If young people really knew this, wow, we would see a young church that is on fire. And when they do know that, we do see that. And you brought up a beautiful example of that. So what's going on with young people? When I go out, as I mentioned earlier, these are some of the other things that I hear from young people. They see the church is stuck. They see the church is doing the same thing that it's always been doing. In a way, we do it this way because we've always done it this way. Well, this is a society that's growing up very differently, a young society. It's growing up very differently with different challenges that we've had. So we don't speak to that reality or understand that reality. It doesn't resonate. They also see that it's a church kind of more concerned about maintenance as opposed to mission. Churches can become a mass factory on the weekends as opposed to something that really gathers and inspires or ignites them. And then also when we look out into the world, we know that unfortunately the good news is not what we lift up first. I hate watching the news because as much as I understand I need to know what's happening in the world, it frustrates the heck out of me that what we tell is just the story of fear and violence. And yes, that's a reality, but what we unfortunately ignore is the good news that's also happening. And sometimes that's trumping, no pun intended there, but sometimes trumping the news that we're struggling with. And thus, the perception that we have is much like what Gustavo Gutierrez once said of Latin America, wherever we look, we see death. So that's hard for young people to get inspired, because thus they then become overwhelmed. And yet young people, the studies show that they're hungering for a sense of belonging, a sense of kinship, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaningful engagement in the world, and they want to do this through the church. If you've never read the National Study on Youth and Religion, what it points out is one of the most profound ways of inspiring young people to faith is ultimately when the church is engaged in mission, when the church is serving the world. That's what young people, more often than not, and it's in my own experience too, that calls young people to a deeper experience. And so I think Pope Francis, in a way, is trying to help us understand that by revitalizing our sense of mission and charging it with a sense of imagination. That, yes, we understand that there's doctrine, we understand it all flows out of Scripture, and that it is grounded in the person of Christ. But then let's take that beautiful example of Christ, those beautiful teachings that flow out of the Word and flow out of our teaching, and bring it to a new way of seeing the world and seeing each other as brothers and sisters. It's what Pope John Paul II, or St. John Paul II, called the Project of Solidarity. We're Eucharistic people. When we come together as Eucharists, all are welcome at the table. Regardless of who you are, what baggage you bring, all are welcome. But that takes work. It makes us uncomfortable if we really embrace that. It's a project of solidarity, but it's a project that I think inspires young people. Just listen to this.
Solidarity is based on our common belief that everything was created by God, and so all creatures are related to one another in this one beautiful community called creation.
Solidarity is, first of all, perhaps what it's not. It's more than just a feeling. Solidarity is a commitment for the welfare of the other one. When we see each other as my brother, my sister, wherever we are, regardless of race, nationalities, belief, we are one human family.
It's being able to reach out to someone and for them to know that you truly care about them, that you're touched by their experience and they're touched by yours. It isn't one where we do something for someone, but we do it with them, and that we grow together to be closer.
One of the scripture passages that illustrate for me the principle of solidarity is St. Paul's image of the body of Christ. When one part of the body suffers, the whole body suffers. When one part of the body rejoices, the whole body rejoices.
Being church, body of Christ, means that we are not only connected to Christ, but then connectedness to Christ means we are connected also to the very mission of Christ, which is a mission of solidarity. And so the body of Christ must be attentive to the contemporary ways by which the human person is really trampled upon.
I'm very lucky to witness some of the great works that the church does overseas through religious orders, through dioceses, through bishops' conferences. We work through that network of the church throughout the world to reach the poorest of the poor.
Solidarity means I am almost in relationship, not only with myself, but with God and with everyone that God loves, especially the poor. But if I am in solidarity, I will also try to go to the roots of what makes people suffer. And I will be willing, as an act of solidarity, to do what I can, according to my state of life, my expertise, to help solve those things.
Yes, we are very busy people. We need to be very clear on our priorities. When we love someone, we take steps to express that love, and we'll prioritize that person. So if we have our priorities clear, we'll have time to pray, first of all, because prayer always is going to lead us to action.
We have this wonderful tool, social media. We have social communications, we have television, we have internet. No one now can claim that he or she has not received any information about what's happening in other parts of the world.
Awareness will lead us to action. This action could take place at a local level with advocacy and also with our finances, our resources.
If we could have greater solidarity throughout the world, I think that would be the peaceful place. That would be the place where, frankly, the Lord has wanted us to come, to create that greater kingdom on earth.
And I think the Holy Father is inviting us into a deeper reflection of just that. When he calls us, for instance, into an encounter with Christ, seen in each other, as known through each other. an encounter with those who are marginalized, who are often marginalized from encounters with Christ because they are just marginalized from relationship altogether. The call to mercy that brings us back into a deeper sense of compassion for each other in the circumstances that we face. And certainly that beautiful witness of accompaniment, where it doesn't matter which situation you're in, he doesn't look at people as interruptions, but as moments of grace. For instance, when the young boy broke through the barricade at World Youth Day, and he just envelops him in his arm. Or Vincencio, a man living with neurofibromatosis, breaks through a barricade, and probably was so alienated throughout his life, and yet embraces it. Pope Francis comes from a theology of availability. He models a theology of availability, and in which he opens himself to the margins because that's the life that surrounded him in Argentina and Latin America. And it was a model that actually, well, I'll come back to that in a second. But ultimately, what Pope Francis tries to foster for all of us is that mission begins with this encounter and then accompaniment that follows that. It is what Oscar Romero modeled for us. I had a chance to go to Oscar Romero's beatification a year and a half ago, or 2.5 years ago. And when you think about the difference that he made in his short time of accompanimento as the Bishop of El Salvador, and the impact that that still has for over 1 million gathered, his motto is sentir con la iglesia, to feel with the church. But it's a feeling with the church that really comes from knowing the church, from accompaniment. In other words, being in relationship and a deeper understanding. It's what Father Greg Boyle models when he works with the gangs and gang members in East LA. Father Greg Boyle is often asked when he speaks about his work in East LA, well, what can we do to help? What can we do for them? And his question often in return is, well, actually, or the question might often be, how can we reach them? And his response in return will be, how can they reach you? In other words, where are you standing? Where are you placing yourself so that they may know you, that they may come to see you, that they may actually be accompanied? In other words, if we keep our distance, we'll never know each other. But if we place ourselves in a situation where we can begin to enter into relationship and know each other, that makes all the difference. And that's what Father Greg has done. He was in a parish in one of the worst areas of East LA, and he opened the doors. And it eventually turned into the largest gang intervention program in the world. Extraordinary, Homeboy Industries. Father Greg often talks about the Beatitudes. It's not so much meaning that we are blessed, but the true translation of the Beatitudes really gets down to you're in the right place if. So in other words, the Beatitudes is not just a spirituality, but it's a geography. It's asking us, where are we standing so that we can be in relationship with each other? God's mission has us and calls us into this extraordinary crossing the boundaries so that we can begin a relationship of love with each other. That's how God's love grows and is known in the world. And that, I think, is what young people become inspired by. So I want you to think about your own ministries with young people. Think about the times when you saw them charged with mission. Even the ones that struggle with it, I want to just sit back. How might these themes of solidarity and accompaniment be relevant? What are the opportunities that present themselves? Like, for instance, we've already named social media because they are connected. And unfortunately, social media can be used for good or for ill. Cyberbullying would be one of those ways of ill. But I've seen young people do extraordinary things with social media as well. What are some of the challenges and obstacles? So I'll give you about 5 to 7 minutes to really dig into some of those questions. Go ahead. How then might we go about doing this with young people? How might we go about fostering it? If you'd like to follow along, I highlighted some points I'm going to make on the second page of this. But you'll see throughout, and I'll be referencing some ideas that are either referenced in the website in this handout. You'll see ways of developing service engagement through encounter, accompaniment, and kinship. Ideas of how to turn projects into accompaniment, for instance. And then there's also the parish resources from Catholic Relief Services. So I'll highlight those as we go through this. But a mission and solidarity, a vision for our times, then how then might we inspire young people? Well, I think in a way we have to move from some of these traditional models of, all right, you've got to fill out the papers and do the hours and boom, that's it. And we never do anything else with that. And I'm not saying that we in this room do that. I think we all know kind of the challenges with that. We want to inspire young people. So what are some things that perhaps I've seen others do well, that I've learned, and even young people inspire me to look at? First idea is to integrate this message of the good news inclusively and creatively. Tell the whole story of Christ with compassion, hope, and joy. I'm telling you, sometimes they get so frustrated when they're standing up there in the gospel, and so this is what happened. And you know, it's frustrating for young people because they don't often see the joy that comes from mission, especially if we're forcing and fighting with them with regard to hours and paperwork. So, first of all, I think we have to introduce young people to the story of the good news of Christ with excitement and joy, and then the story of the good news as seen in each other and as known throughout the world. And so we can do that through all of the beautiful stories that flow out of Catholic Charities, CRS, mission and mission organizations and so forth. There is good news being told, and how do we bring that to young people? And how do we do it in a variety of different levels? When we gather as families, a large community, when we gather them as youth groups, when we're working with them as individuals, are we talking about this sense of mission to each other? Do we bring it in the liturgy? Do we bring it into the classroom? Look for ways of inspiring and telling the story of mission. That's what Christ was all about. Mission to each other. And it was mission rooted in accompaniment, mission rooted in knowing each other through deep relationship, and then calling us out to do the same. One creative way that has always inspired me, back in 1991, and maybe the fact that I have to reference it from something so long ago means we should be doing this, but Bishop Ken Huntner made it a 3-month requirement in his diocese to ask before every time someone gathered in church, to ask the question, how shall what we are doing here affect or involve the poor today? So when you gathered as on the liturgical committee, pastoral council, etc., you had to begin that gathering with that question. That gets people thinking differently and seeing themselves differently. And even in recognizing that if we have our brothers and sisters who are marginalized that are not here today, maybe we might even begin to ask the question, well, how can we include, invite, bring in? So, simple suggestion that I loved and never forgotten that. Second point is to respect the continuation of development and maturity. There are going to be people that are not ready for mission and service and are going to sit there and say, go ahead and challenge me. I remember one time I worked with the football coach at the school because the football players in particular were one of those groups of guys that really didn't want to be involved. So we were bringing a group of the guys down to an outreach center for people living in the streets in Baltimore. And as we were going down, they made it very clear, Mr. Miles, we're not going to go do what you want us to do. We're going to stand behind the line. I don't want to go out and talk to people. And they made it very known, this one group of guys, that they made it very clear they did not want to get engaged. But all right, let's meet them where they're at and say, fine, you can stand behind the line. While they were there, though, a former student of their peer of theirs, who had left our school 2 years ago, started coming through the line with his parents. And I thought, oh my gosh, so this is obviously what happened to Walter. And we never knew. He just pulled out of school, and unfortunately, his family was struggling with a great deal of poverty and upheaval in their own lives. So I thought I need to just watch and see rather than forcing anything. And as Walter went through, they greeted him, they hugged him, and as soon as he went through into the dining hall, the guys came up to me, can we go and sit with him? Can we just hear what, have some time with him? Let them go in there, and they spent the entire rest of the morning in greeting everybody else. Now that was a bit of a miracle that happened. I never planned that, but the beautiful thing is I think when we meet young people where they are, miracles happen. And rather than trying to pull them along too fast, let's just say if we can meet halfway, or let's just acknowledge that some people really are uncomfortable moving too quickly into relationship. And so how can we do this steadily? How can maybe a project be better for some as opposed to others? And that's maybe my starting point. That's what we look at when we say we meet people where they are. And we invite them to connect their gifts to a way of serving. So we all know we invite young people who are good at music into the music ministry for our liturgies. We invite young people who are good at proclaiming. We use that for liturgical ministries. Why can't we do that for service ministries? Understanding where they can do well. You're good at art. You can make cards for the homebound or for the elderly in a nursing home. You're good at cooking. You can do culinary classes for young people that are disadvantaged. Or you can make soup that can be used and served at the soup kitchen. There's a variety of ways if we just begin to connect young people's gifts to service, they become then inspired. And ultimately, if we can help widen their circle of concern to a circle of influence. I am concerned about young people that live in poverty, but I don't know what to do. I'm concerned about climate change, but I don't know what to do. These issues are too big. So how do we then help young people understand what they can do, at least locally, by connecting them to a way of acting, connecting them to just a simple starting point, where they can then move into action to see that they can have an influence in some small way. It's as what Mother Teresa would often say. None of you could be doing what I'm doing, but I could not be doing what any of you are doing. Each of us can bring love to that face of Christ right in front of us wherever we are in the world. So we have this circle of concern. Let's start with that, and let's move that to our circle of influence. And then gradually we begin to explore and discern how that can grow. CRS Christ Bowl, I think, is one of those great ways of highlighting the circle of concern and letting young people know, like, I can't do anything for somebody in El Salvador or somebody in Africa. Well, actually, yes, you can. You can actually pray, learn about it, and then give during the season of Lent, and our money goes right into those feeding programs that help us. A simple way of connecting concern with influence. Pray, contemplate, and ritualize. In other words, help young people become the contemplative in action. I think young people are hungering for silence. When we move too quickly, when we move too fast, it becomes difficult to live deeply. And so sometimes we move into things without even really thinking about it. I think young people want to see themselves as being able to serve, as being able to give. But we have to invite them into that reflection about how God might be calling. And that means sometimes turning off the cell phones and silencing ourselves. So do we connect service with reflection, with prayer, with an understanding of God's call? Do we also, sometimes perhaps as Thomas Merton says, pray with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other? So that when I look at the challenges of the world, I'm not getting so lost in despair, but I see that God calls me to a hope. And that people live with challenges at another time too, and yet God was with them. So how is God with us and the challenges that we face today? Praying with the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other. This year, CRS is going to be starting a new program called Pray Out Loud. You'll see it on our education site beginning in September at the start of the school year. But it's going to be an opportunity to help young people lead with faith on two issues. We will provide a toolkit that we hope will inspire young people to either do some kind of public witness about migration in solidarity with migrants, or in solidarity with those that struggle with water, and access to water, and access to healthy sanitation. It's a way of living their faith out loud. So I'm hoping that that will be something that becomes a nice resource that leads young people into a contemplation of some of the realities of the world, and then inspires them to a faith-filled, faith-based public witness to how God is calling us to serve each other. Fourth one, move from service to solidarity. So rather than always doing for, in other words, rather than going to the soup kitchen and then dishing out the meal, or going to Habitat and simply putting up the wall, how do we do with? How do we enter into relationship and serve with those who are in need? I made from a project to long term. When I was at Cardinal Gibbons in Baltimore, we had a relationship with the Catholic Worker House, Viva House, and the Franciscan Center, run by the Franciscan nuns. And so we would bring young people on a regular basis to those institutions, and a relationship was formed with them. They knew us, and young people became familiar with the agencies themselves and even some of the clients. And then it established a greater sense of commitment and comfort in doing this. Moving from collecting hours to mentoring and apprenticeship. And what do I mean by that? And there's this whole reflection and analysis that moves in. Well, I'll share a story. This is Mark. When I was youth minister in my third year, we started the first ever work camp for my parish community. We joined with a few others. Only had 10 kids that went that year. Mark was one of them. And it was clear that he was forced to go by his parents. He made it known he did not want to be there. But on the third day, we were working with Habitat for Humanity. The gentleman who was going to own the house, his family came and worked with us and spent the rest of the week with us. And Carl worked with Mark. Mark is going around a shoddy job of putting up the drywall. But Carl knew what he was doing. Started working with Mark, giving him some skills, and the two of them just bonded, and you could see this relationship forming. At the end of the week, when we asked Mark, where did you, well, we asked everybody in prayer, where did you see Christ that week? Mark had just exploded about Carl, and you could tell there was something that was transformative that had happened. When we came back, Mark became the best advocate for the work camp. He spoke at Mass, which is something he never would have done. He got his family involved, and it was his family and Mark that inspired us to make our work camp intergenerational. When I left, we had over 100 people from just our parish going, and it's still going on today. Mark left and became a Habitat for Humanity volunteer and got his school, his university involved in the Chesapeake chapter of Habitat. When he was going to grad school, he became a foreman in Habitat. And then when he became an accountant, he got an Affordable Housing Coalition. Now I share all of that. It wasn't anything I did, but it was something that our whole parish community did. It provided a forum for mentoring and apprenticing. And it was something that Carl did. It was that encounter and working with him and showing him. And Mark discovered a sense of his own gifts. There's a parish that I continually lift up, St. Peter of Paul in Cary, Illinois. Their model of service is discipleship groups. They invite adults to come forward to name something that they would like to bring to their service commitment for a year. And then young people are invited then to choose which area. So you could be a mechanic and serve low-income families. You could work with Rachel's project. You could work with a local soup kitchen. You could do knitting for women who are expecting. You could go to the nursing home. There is an adult mentor, and the kids sign up. They make that commitment for a year. They gather at least once or twice a month for the servants, for reflection. They have a beginning retreat, a mid-year retreat, and an end-of-year retreat. I'm just astounded by it. The woman who started it had 20 in her first year and has now over 400 kids involved each year regularly. Young Neighbors in Action by the Center for Ministry Development is a summer service leadership program I recommend because they weave that whole practice of service, analysis, and prayer and Catholic social teaching throughout. So, moving from service to solidarity, two good models right there. Using social media for the common good. Rather than telling young people, no more, let's face it, it's not going to go away. So how do we help young people enter into responsible use of social media and bring God into it? By sharing their stories, showing pictures of their service opportunities, inviting others in, or using it as a forum to invite, or even post messages about their concerns, as opposed to so-and-so did this or so-and-so did that. It's amazing what we can do for good through social media, and we've all seen that. And then finally, the idea of think globally and act locally. It's what I like to call the 2 feet of love in action as well. It's a way of understanding that we give through our charity, where we meet basic needs, and we can really help establish a difference on a very local level. That person right in front of me is hungry, I can bring food. That person right in front of me or that agency is cold, I can bring blankets and clothing. However, at some point we have to help young people ask their questions. Why are people hungry? Why are people cold? Why are people struggling? And move them into looking at these root causes and letting them know that when they call their congressman or woman, they listen because young people are the future voters. Or that young people can actually organize and begin to raise awareness. We're going to be sponsoring, well actually we can just touch on this. The bishops and CRS have a legislative network called Catholics Confront Global Poverty. And we lift up issues throughout the year where we know Catholics can make a difference. Right now we're focusing on the Syrian refugees and finding assistance, migration, on hunger, and climate change. Because these are core issues that are affecting all of us. So, inspiring young people to mission. A variety of different steps and resources that you see there. The one that I want to continue to highlight. As we invite young people to accompany, we have to recognize that we have to model that and accompany them. In other words, I think service is a great opportunity for us to be mentors like we've never been before. Young people are looking for that kind of inspiration to be led into something special. They can't just be pushed in. Let's walk with them. Let's journey with them. Let's teach them how to use their skills for the service of others. A program that we'll be launching later this year is called Stand and Lead. It's a peer ministry program on global solidarity, where it will be a retreat that we offer in which you take young people to an understanding of solidarity, how the church has modeled that solidarity, and how the church has stood then with others, and then how they can do so as well. I'm really excited about it. We're piloting it this year, so if this would be something that you would be interested in, I'll put my contact information at the end and be happy to send that to you. If it's something you'd be willing to help us look at so we can improve it and make sure that we're offering the best type of retreat experience, we would love to work with you on that. So, one of the things, what's that?
That was fast.
That was fast, sorry. I can give you the information will be in there as well. So what I invite you to think about as you go from this experience today is how do we continue to form young people in these habits? Think about that in terms of your own programming. How do we integrate that in? How do we foster and invite young people in the sense of mission to the world? And what are some of the other principles that shape your missiological imagination? We're focused on solidarity, kinship, and accompaniment today. There's so much more that animates our mission. So what are some of those principles that help animate your own mission, your own sense of mission in life? And how can you share that with young people too? I'd like to just maybe close with a prayer that reminds us that the work is still ongoing, but the work is grounded in hope. and it's grounded in our deep faith and commitment to Christ, that we too, like Christ, want to bring God's love into the world. And so if you can read that, I invite you to pray with me. Let us give space to what has not yet been seen, to what is waiting for our hospitality and mercy. Let us trust ourselves into the chaos out of which the Spirit creates and forms beyond our imagining. Here in the community of uncertainty, we may hear the whisperings of the mystic, gaze in wonder at the artist's work. Here is a time and a space to be present to what God struggles to birth, an invitation to watch and wait with hope. So thank you. I really appreciate you being here today. And if you do have any questions, you're going to kind of have questions there at the end. Feel free to come up.